Curator Gast is here, speaking at noon on the 26th of December at the Sturgeon Bay Museum 2018. Feel free to, what's your name, your age, and what was your previous positions with the museum?
My name is John Gast. I'm 65 years old. I'm past board member of the Maritime Museum, also operations director and executive director, and then became part-time here and took over as volunteer and special events coordinator.
So quite a lot of hats there.
Quite a few hats, yes.
When did you come to Door County and how long have you lived here?
I came to Door County in 1975 when I got hired by the Door County Advocate, and I've lived here ever since. So that basically amounts to 40 plus years.
Where were you previously?
Previously, I grew up in Green Bay. Went to school at the University of Nevada in Reno. I got a degree in journalism, and then came back and got my initial job with the Green Bay Press-Gazette before I came up to Sturgeon Bay.
And was it, so it's primarily that position that drew you to the county?
I'm sorry?
It was that position that drew you to the county?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was just when I got the opportunity to take over, and I was a sports writer, they had a sports position open here, and I took it and just stayed.
So then how did you go from being a sports writer to participating and eventually leading the Door County Maritime Museum?
Well, I got a real passion for history, and I've always kind of followed that path a little bit in stuff I do. Even when I was doing sports, I like to do historical based stuff. The tie into the Maritime Museum came when the property that the current Sturgeon Bay Museum sits on became vacant, and there were a number of us in the community who saw that as a possibility for a great location for a maritime museum. So I happened to try to start a group together to start looking into that and see what could be done to potentially secure the property. Just so happened that a friend of mine, Dan Osted, who went on to become president of the board of the Maritime Museum Board, was one step ahead of me already and was coordinating with the Maritime Museum to do that, because the museum at the time was over next to Bay Shipbuilding in the old rolling steamship offices, and of course it was seasonal. It was only open in the summertime, so we foresaw a bigger year-round facility that we thought would appeal to the tourism aspects, and thought Sturgeon Bay, which was trying to grow its tourism business at the time, this would be a nice attraction. So the city, Dan and Orville Shop kind of led the charge in terms of getting the city's approval for the property. And from there it was kind of like we just had to put it all together, raise some money, build a building, and then hope that people would come, and fortunately they have. So
what was it like trying to fundraise for this location? Tell me some of the background work trying to get those funds together, that dream together, and get that first shovel in the ground.
Well, obviously this wasn't going to be, a cheap endeavor, so we wanted to make it be a really nice facility. We wanted it to be top-notch, and with its position where it's located, being right on the waterfront, we wanted it to be attractive because we knew it was going to be in a prominent position in the city. So, so we basically went through and wanted to make sure we got good architectural work done on it, which we did. Ben Schenkelberg eventually was the architect on the project, put together a really nice, what we felt really nice design, and then it just basically came down to getting initial support financially to be able to get the foundation laid for that. And a lot of that came from the maritime community within Sturgeon Bay, between Peterson Builders and the Rowan family, with John had ended up at John Asher. We had a number of really good maritime-based donors that really helped us in the process, and then of course we also had businesses within the community that helped. So it didn't take us long to get a really good foundation built. We eventually had set a goal that was exceeded $2 million at the time, which in the mid-90s was a pretty good chunk of money. And we were able to successfully get it to close to that. And eventually we went out on bids, and the bids came in very favorable. So we actually decided before we hit the goal that we were going to actually build it, because we didn't know if we'd ever get a bid like that before again. So we took it and we built it, and as it happened, we opened it in I think 97, I think was the year that we eventually opened the museum up, and which was a really fun experience, because once we made that decision and we got it finished in the middle of the winter, I think about February, we had to, in essence, get this thing ready for the tourist season. So there was a lot of curatorial work that had to be done in that period of time. And everybody just kind of jumped on board. We had citizen committees that each took over and assisted. Our curator at the time was Christine Randall, and she kind of oversaw the project, but she kind of passed it off and oversaw what each of these committees did. One of mine was I was in charge of the lighthouse room up above. So we had a committee of about 5 or 6 that worked on putting that lighthouse exhibit together. And what you see up there today is there have been some changes to it, probably one significant overhaul of that exhibit, but generally in preparation of knowing that we were going to get the Sherwood Point lens, that was always geared to be built around that inside of that exhibit. And so it was fun because everybody had their own little area that they worked on and could take ownership in. And as it turned out, we got it all done, and we were able to open her up on time in June and welcome the first tourists.
So it sounds like there was a lot of community investment early on then.
There was, and I think that also helped, even like I said, we hadn't finished the fundraising, but I think the fact that we got more of the community involved in it really continued to help that process, because as more people got involved, they all had buy-in, and consequently, it got us to the point where we were able to financially, get this thing done. And so yes, it is. This is really a community-based organization and museum, because we wouldn't have gotten it done without the volunteers and without the people that came in and assisted. I think it just shows the investment people have in the maritime community here in Sturgeon Bay. It's played such a vital role going back many, many, many years, that I think, when people saw the opportunity that this was going to showcase that history, that they saw this as something that they wanted to be a part of. So
you've been with the museum for then quite a while. Mm-hmm. And you had said that you had eventually become executive director. Mm-hmm. Explain how that came to be and your experiences in that position.
Well, I was on the Maritime Museum Board from, I think, 1991 I was on. And then, of course, we built the museum, and I was on it during that process. Once we got, at that point, we really didn't have much in the way of staff people on board. It had been a seasonal type operation. We had basically hired Doug Henderson as executive director, and he had an assistant, and then we brought on Christine, knowing that once we had the plans, we were going to build a museum, we needed to have a curator. But so we had a very limited staff at that time. We didn't have a lot of money to basically pay them, so obviously we were trying to get by the best we possibly could. So as the process kind of went along, my involvement with it kind of was, again, just as everybody else was, a volunteer board member, assistant as best I could with helping with the development of this museum. And then what happened was, once we actually got it built and we opened it, we suddenly realized that we had to start adding staff. We had to, in essence, start investing some people into this place to take care of it, to man the gift shop year round. We were going to upscale that and make that a much more of a profit base, profit center for us than it had been in the past. So we had a number of employees, and this place had to be taken care of. So I was approached by the board to see if I'd be interested to leave the paper and come over here and become operations director. So Doug was going to retain the position as executive director and continue to raise funds for the museum, but I was going to take over operations and make sure that it operated and deal with any issues related to personnel or any other physical issues that had to be done with the museum. That stayed on I was here for about 3.5 years doing that, And then Doug decided that once we had kind of gotten quite a bit of the fundraising done, we hadn't up to that point completely paid it off, but Doug decided he wanted to get into curatorial work and approached me and asked if he thought that I might want to go up and become executive director. And it was at that same time when we went out and we hired Trudy Herbst to become the development director, and I took over as executive director. Doug eventually took over as curator for a while because he just wanted to get more involved with the actual what was going on and how we were telling the story here in the museum. So then I went and took care of, became executive director, and I did that for about a year and a half, and then I was approached back by the newspaper to come back and to assist some purchases and some other things that were going on with some new publications they were doing. And I have to admit, my ink was running pretty thick through my veins, and it was really difficult. I admit I missed it. I missed being in the writing aspect of journalism, so I ended up going back over to the newspaper. Still stayed involved with this from a volunteer standpoint. And then when I left there in 2008, I basically came back over here and took over as interim director after Brian Kelsey had left as executive director. And I did that for about 6 or 7 months until we hired Bob Dash and he became executive director. I stayed on after that for an additional almost 10 years, just doing in a part-time basis of doing the volunteer coordination, special event coordination, and that type of stuff. So yeah, it's been a number of years, both in a full-time and a part-time capacity here at the museum.
Great. Well then, what were some of then your more enjoyable or memorable moments at the museum?
Well, obviously the most exciting part was actually getting this thing built. I mean, I think that was all of us that were involved in that initial process, even from the initial committee meetings that we had related to it. It still was a little bit of a pipe dream considering what we wanted to build. So obviously when we got that shovel in the ground and we were able to get this thing built and be able to start to tell the stories, that was probably the real highlight. But throughout there have been some great experiences. I mean, we've had some fun things happen during that time. I served along with Christine at the time as curator for the World War II space that we have in here. I personally felt, and I think within the museum, we felt we needed to tell a better story of the World War II shipbuilding history, and to have that come up and then produce a video to go with it was really exciting. And that was probably from an exhibit standpoint and the participation of that, since I really wasn't that heavily involved with the curatorial side. To be able to be involved and help with that process was great. And of course, along with that came the Periscope, which was another whole other story, which became exceptionally fun when able to put that in and just to see the fun people have with it here in the museum. So from an exhibit standpoint, those particularly two kind of stand out for me. Otherwise, just the fact that we've had some great people work here, and working with the people here at the museum throughout the years has been a treat. Being a nonprofit, they're not famous for paying, so consequently, to get people that are passionate about what we're doing and what we're trying to do as far as tell the story of history, and Sturgeon Bay and Door County's history related to the maritime fields is fun, and it's neat to be able to share that with other people. So I've done that, and then the other things I've enjoyed is I've been heavily involved with the summer boat festival. So I've done that for many years, and consequently heading that up and doing it has always been a real treat. Between that and doing the Lighthouse Festival, those are kind of my two things that I kind of did. And when we took the Lighthouse Festival over from at the time it was the Chamber, but now it's the Door County Visitor Bureau, we weren't really sure how that was going to work, but as it turned out, it's really turned out well, and just associating with all these people that love lighthouses has been great. And then a little later in the summer, we do the boat festival and everything we do with that, the fun things with the Sycoflex races, to bringing in some fabulous boats has been really exciting too. So it's both inside these walls and what we've been able to do, outside the walls in terms of events has been enjoyable for me.
Great. Well then, another question would be, we talked about some of the great moments, but what were some of your most difficult and trying moments, either in your position as executive director, or just in your participation with the museum?
Well, probably one of the more difficult moments is that in the construction of this building, we had some shortcomings, let's put it that way. And since I became the first operations director here, I had to deal with some of those issues. Some of the construction elements inside the building weren't always the easiest and always kind of presented some challenges. And I think we still have some of those today. So it's something that's, it's a continual process as we kind of work through these and find the funding to be able to take care of some of those. It turned out to be a beautiful building, and I think the people that come here and visit it, come walking out of it really, totally excited and in many cases surprised at what we're able to put out here. I think that's been a real treat to be able to see, people's reaction. Maybe they just don't expect a small town like this to have a museum of this caliber. So that's always exciting. But from the frustrating side is to keep it at that level is always a challenge. So it's been fine, and you kind of anticipate that to happen. We just had a few of them with this building because it is supposed to be, it's supposed to be from a humidification standpoint. All those things are supposed to be maintained for the artifacts that we have in here, and that literally has been a challenge to be able to do that in this building. So that, I guess, if I had to say, would probably be been the biggest challenge at the time that I was here in a management situation.
So then, you were involved with the museum for quite a while, but even your involvement was relatively short considering 50 full years that the museum's been around in one form or another. And so I would just like to get your thoughts on what those 50 years have meant.
I think that's remarkable when you think about it, because when you think about where it all started, and I think you have to go up, obviously you have to go up to the northern part of the peninsula, and you have to look at the Weberg family, and you have to look at Charlie Voigt and some of these people that were directly involved in the initial creation of the museum. I was fortunate to get on the board when a lot of these people were still, some of these people were still alive, and the role that they played, and the significant role that they played in getting this thing going. And then you have Ray Christensen down in Sturgeon Bay, who saw the connection between Sturgeon Bay and with the Gills Rock operation, and the fact that he, in essence, started, the operation here as far as bringing in the Rowan building and using that as our initial museum down here. I think those are the people that really kind of had the vision of what could have exactly happened here, so I think when you look at it, that's where it all starts, and the fact that we still have a nice facility up at Gills Rock is important, because that's really where it all started. And I think then you also have to look at what the work we've done out at Cana Island is really significant. So, the Cana effort goes way back to the Jandas and what they were able to do to maintain and keep that building up out there, when it could have been like what happened with a lot of other lighthouses that could have started a real deterioration process. So when you look at what Louis, Rosie, and their kids all did during their summers when they were out there, as a real tribute to them, and what we've been able to do in terms of continually now do the upgrades we've done up at Cana. We have just an absolutely spectacular, piece of Door County history up there that we're able to share. So there are people, that we look at that have played an important role in the early years that have got us to the point now to where we have 3 wonderful facilities, and of course, when you come down and you talk to this one, I talked about Ray Christensen in Sturgeon Bay, but then you have to look in, and you got to look at people like John Asher, who really stepped to the forefront, and has played an important role here also. So it's been, I guess, from that standpoint, the 50 years seems like a long time, but just seems like it's gone blowing by pretty fast too, because like I said, I got involved in 1991, and at that point, that's, the museum at that point really wasn't that old, so it's pretty significant when you think about that span of time.
You mentioned Ray Christensen, who obviously is passed on, and Did you know him personally?
No, I didn't know Ray at all. But at the time I finally got involved with the Maritime Museum, he wasn't involved with it anymore. But you know, his story and his legacy was pretty strong here in Sturgeon Bay. So, and with my interest in history and getting involved with the museum, it didn't take long to understand what he had done and what Christie Corporation, the role they played was significant from a shipbuilding standpoint, especially right after the war. So, I think looking at him, and he probably would be considered like the father of the Sturgeon Bay side of the museum. So, yeah, it's being on the board. You heard a lot of stories about Ray. So the fact that I didn't actually get a chance to meet him, I felt in a lot of ways I got to know him a little bit.
Great. So 50 years have gone by, but you know, what might the next 50 years hold for the museum?
Well, I think, you know, it's a really interesting question. You know, I think that's going to be up to the community in a lot of ways. How does the community embrace this facility, and is it important to them to maintain this legacy? I think that's going to be the key point of the future of this museum, because these nonprofits like this just don't survive unless the community gets behind them. And we know that in Door County because we've got a lot of them here I mean, they range everywhere from land conservation to entertainment. So, you know, we're all kind of in this together. We all kind of know what it takes. And fortunately, we have some passionate people that come in here and really care about a lot of that happens here in Door County and what it's all about. But one thing that I think is vitally important is this maritime history. We are a county of water, so if we can't maintain these museums, I just feel it's going to be unfortunately it's going to be a struggle to maintain these, and we're going to lose a lot of history because we're probably as rich in maritime history as we are in any other kind of history here in the county. So hopefully people understand that, and that's really the job of the museum is to try to get that message out and have them understand exactly how important that is. And if we can make it fun and entertaining for the younger kids that grow up through here, and that they get an appreciation for what it is, I think it has a bright future. And so I'm optimistic, but at the same time, I think with anything you're a little cautiously optimistic because you want to make sure that we have. I think right now we're in a good position from a leadership standpoint, and also within the community. I think there are some community members that are definitely deeply involved. So I guess when you get down to it, I'm optimistic. I think the future is bright for the museum.
Great. Are there any other thoughts, memories, experiences, or even commentary that you'd like to share about your time with the Maritime Museum that we haven't talked about elsewhere?
I don't know if I think I've pretty much touched on most of it. I think, for me personally, the aspect of the Maritime Museum is important because for me it was a passion, and the history here is partially with me is because it's my family. I'm not from Door County. I grew up in Green Bay, but as was the case with a lot of people in northeastern Wisconsin, my dad came up here during the war and worked at Peterson Boat Works, and brought his family up. And at the time, my brother and sister were very young. So they lived in the defense housing development that was here in town. They had some of the units are still around here. So I guess maybe that's where my history is. My mother was allowed to christen one of the boats over that was built at Peterson during the war. So I guess that part, even though at a young age I wasn't really made that aware of it, but as I kind of got up into Sturgeon Bay and I kind of put the pieces together, I kind of realized, it's a part of my history too, and it's not just because I moved here and got an interest in the Maritime Museum. So I like to share that. I love doing tours here in the museum. I think that's probably a vital way to try to pass that along. And it's amazing how many people, when they come in here, actually kind of embrace, even though they may be from Minnesota or Chicago or from any other part of the Midwest, come in here and find a fascination with this community, the harbor, the construction, all the things that happened here over the last century or more. So it's that kind of fuels you. If you get involved and you come here and you start getting involved with the museum, you suddenly realize that it is kind of fascinating, and that people that really you wouldn't think would have any interest in this place really find it pretty interesting that this community has done what it's done over that period of time. So we tell good stories. I hope that's the future, is that we tell more great stories. And that's probably the big task at hand for the staff, is to continue to tell more of these interesting stories that we've got, because there are just so many of them that you could go on, and it's a challenge. And I think as we tell those stories, we'll get more and more people involved in the museum too, because if it affected them, they're in essence going to step forward and see the importance of it. So I guess that's where I kind of see my involvement, is that I have a personal attachment, and so for that standpoint, I'd like to continue to stay involved with it.
And I guess just one last question. Would you like to leave a message for anyone who might view this interview in its entirety at some later date, whether it be a researcher or just someone that's curious?
Well, that's an interesting question. Tell me a little more about what you want from me from that. So,
I guess if there is just one thing to summarize, or
so am I talking to future staff? Is that what the thing is?
Talking to future staff, you're talking to maybe future researcher, anybody that might see this tape later. Yeah, because this is all going to be preserved in the archive. Mm-hmm. So this might be someone 50 years down the road.
Okay. I guess if I we're going to talk to anybody down the road that sees this many years from now, I hope that from it they get some appreciation for just how passionate people are about the museum and about the history. So I guess maybe this is more of the journalist in me, as opposed to the historical person, is the fact that there's just so much out there. There's going to be a lot that probably hasn't even been uncovered at the time, years down the line, that there's always going to be a story, there's always going to be something interesting to basically pull out. It's never ever always going to be totally told. So I guess what I would ask people to be constantly curious as to what's happening, to constantly stay up to date on what's happening on the maritime field here in the community, to constantly tell those stories, whether or not they're fresh stories, or to continue to look back and find historical stories that maybe haven't been told before.
Great. All right, well, thanks, John,
no problem.
Sitting down and doing this quick air quotes interview. Hey,
no, it's great, and it's great that we're able to do this, both from the standpoint of doing an exhibit, but even probably more important, to put together something that has a kind of a historical narrative of the museum on its 50th. So that's good.